Yes, folks, we are back. This is the Dish Pig, where we go on a journey of discovery in the food and booze world. I'm your host, Nick Sherry. We've been on a short summer hiatus here at Dish Pig HQ. The wife and I recently moved back to our home here in Los Angeles, California. It's good to be back, and I'm very excited to expand the Dish Pig base and bring you more content from not just Australia, but the US and other parts of the world as well. Now, I recently picked up a new COVID hobby, another one, worms. Composting worms. Absolute riveting stuff. Just trying to cut back on food waste and the garbage, really. And you can actually buy anything on the internet, including my 2 pounds of red wigglers, which were shipped from Georgia, believe it or not. Not very carbon friendly, but I'll try and make up for it. Anyway, I'll be sure to keep you updated on my worms as they start devouring our food scraps. I'm excited. I'm also very excited about this week's episode because, back by popular demand, and a special thanks to our friends at firewood.com.au for making this possible, we're revisiting the world of tequila with co-founder of Tequila Tromba, Nick Reid. We caught up this week via Zoom, and we covered a lot. So make sure you stay dialed in all the way to the end, where we share some pretty colourful stories from the early days of Tequila Tromba. So let's get into it.
I'll get into my hammock.
Get into your hammock, ready?
Oh yeah. That's the ticket. So it's really high too, because I haven't bought the extensions yet for like the ropes. So it's like a metre and a half off the ground.
So if you fell out of this hammock, you could hurt yourself.
Oh no, you would definitely hurt yourself. It's as tall as me. Really.
Are you confident in the supports on the wall there behind you?
Yeah, I think so. Like it was already here. That's why I bought it. It's like someone's put some like Rio into the wall, so it's like pretty solid.
Yeah, nice.
And I think if it was going to fall, it wouldn't just fall clean. It'd probably start to get loose first.
So you get some warning before you landed on the hard terracotta tiles below you.
Yeah, like if it broke here and I fell backwards, I could potentially break my neck. But I literally just bought the straps on Amazon, so I'll get them next week. So no, I'm the only one who's willing to get up into it here. So it's not very practical for visitors.
Beautiful. Well, we're rolling here. So
a good bit of hammock chat to start things off.
Bit of hammock chat. Well, Nick Reid, welcome. It's good to be talking to you.
Thanks a lot, mate. Thanks for having me.
Via the interweb. You're actually the first. The Dish Pig has officially gone global. You're the first international guest. All the way from
very nice.
All the way from Guadalajara, Mexico.
Extremely honoured.
What was we were talking about this before we started rolling, but what was the last thing you cooked for yourself?
I am currently cooking beef jerky, and that was also the last thing I cooked because I did a batch overnight. Now I'm doing a day batch.
Little day batch.
Bit of sirloin steak jerky. Quite delightful.
I've never made jerky. I came across. It wasn't the dehydrator you were talking about, the Ninja one. It was something else. But talk me through your beef jerky recipe.
It's actually pretty simple. I mean, I think there's like marinades and stuff you can use, but mine's pretty simple. I literally just cut it as finely as I can, chuck a bit of salt on it, and then dehydrate it for 6 hours. Leave the fat on because the fat is delicious, also dehydrated, also high in calories to get you through the day.
High in calories.
Did you know that there is 7,700 calories in each kilo of fat?
7,000. Say that again.
7,700 calories in a kilo of beef fat.
It's quite a lot of calories.
That's good.
Are you bulking up?
I lost a few kegs, but in the process of trying to go up, not down, like most of the population.
And you got to slice your beef relatively thin, right? When it's jerky time.
Yeah, I mean you can do it thicker. Like here in Mexico, they have like a style of jerky. It's thicker, like it's probably like a quarter of an inch thick, and then they'll reheat it, and that's good too. But yeah, if you want like a snack to take around with you, it's better to do it as thin as you can.
And they reheat the jerky, so like rehydrating it.
Yeah, so they'll dry it out, and then when they serve it to you, they'll quickly fry it.
Wow.
Give it to you with a bit of salsa. Delightful.
So you're just walking the streets of Guadalajara with sticks of beef jerky in your pockets? Is that? I'm just trying to get this image.
Little Ziploc always in my laptop bag. Delicious, nutritious snack.
Ah, very nice. Well, like I said, good to be talking to you. And look, the reason we're doing this in the very first episode of the Dish Pig was about Tequila Tromba, and I spoke to co-founder and brother of mine, James Sherry. So we're back by popular demand. It's the inspiration for this came from, there's a fantastic podcast out there called the Rewatchables. Highly recommend. And it's where they kind of break down rewatchable films and, talk shit about it for an hour and a half. Fantastic stuff. But they did they did the film Heat, and then they decided that they just had to revisit it, so they called it the Reheat. So we're going back to Tromba because, I got James's version of events, of how it all unfolded, how it all began. Now you can just tell the real story, the truth, maybe.
Well, I listened to that one, and I think our versions are pretty similar. I suppose the main difference is that apart from the first couple of years where we were together in the same city, where Jim was in the early days moved to Sydney, and then about 7 years ago moved to the US, and then I was in Australia for a bit longer than him, and then I've been in Mexico for about 6 years. So I have a bit more of the Mexican perspective more than he does, and he's had more of the US perspective than I have.
Yeah. Growing up, like, what did you want to be when you were a kid?
I actually wanted to be a vet because I really like animals. And then
a vet,
for work experience in year 10, I went and did work at a vet, and all I did was watch them chop off, castrate dogs and cats, and it was like, nah, this isn't for me. So my work experience worked in the opposite way of I really don't want to do this anymore. And then studied commerce arts, so finance, history, and Spanish, and did an exchange for uni into Mexico, and that was in 2005, and pretty much been here ever since. On and off, not the whole time, but definitely been connected to here ever since anyway.
Well, I mean, deciding to actually study Spanish that was like the gateway, I guess, into your whole adventure in Mexico. But I think I remember back in the day when you were taking Spanish lessons. Were you deciding between learning Spanish and another language? I can't remember.
No, I always wanted to learn Spanish just because I thought that firstly it's a language that's spoke across a large number of countries, and also there was a lot of countries that I was really interested in, in Central America and South America. I started. I did a summer course at uni in must have been 2003, nearly 20 years ago now.
And just went from there.
And I was doing it at uni, and then I wanted to do an exchange, and then in that time, so this is 2004 in Australia. We didn't really know very much about Mexico. We had Old El Paso, and what's that chain called? That Tex-Mex chain? Taco Bell? No, that's in the US. What's our one called?
An Australian Tex-Mex brand chain.
Yeah, that one that's There's one in Chapel Street.
Shit,
Anyway,
I
I
can't
can't
remember.
remember. Yeah, so I didn't really know anything about Mexico.
Couldn't have been that good if we can't remember it.
What was it called? I'm sure they're still around. Well, there's one in Chapel Street. There's one in Russell Street in Melbourne. But yeah, so like when I went to go on exchange, it was I actually really want to go to Argentina because I didn't really know anything about Mexico. And there was no uni didn't have any exchange programs anywhere except Mexico. So it was just Mexico for a Spanish-speaking country, and then you could go to it was a bunch of different cities. I can't remember. It was like maybe 10 or 15 different cities in Mexico you could have gone to. And not really one of doing too much research into these sort of things. So I chose to go to Guadalajara because a mate of mine who was in Spanish class he just got back, and he basically goes, I just went to Guadalajara. It was great. You should go there. And so I went there. That was pretty much the extent of my research. I had no idea that it was like, the home of tequila or the home of mariachi. I had no idea what I was getting into, and then got here, and then it's pretty crazy that 16 years later I'm still here.
Well, what were your kind of first impressions when you got to Mexico? I mean, like at this stage, doing an exchange was purely just to aid in, your language skills, and it wasn't about, anything to do with discovering what, Jalisco kind of had to offer yet. It was purely just I'm just going to go here, I'm going to study, learn the language more.
Learn the language and run amok, pretty much. That was the plan. And and I did. It was good fun. So that was 2000. So that was 2005. And ended up going back to Australia in 2006, finishing uni, and then came back here in 2007. And was here 2000, 2008, and then moved back to Australia in 2009. And then did Australia 2009, 2015, and then moved back here in 2015, and been here since. So the Tromba story sort of started in 2008. Well, it really started in 2005 me and Eric, our Canadian partner, we lived together here. So that was sort of the first time we started drinking heaps of tequila and started getting to really know it and understanding how different it was from what we had thought of it in Australia. And I was like, everyone, not even in Australia, around the world, everyone's got their tequila story. When I was 17 years old, and I had that actually down at that your mum's, when she had that house down in Sorrento one summer, and I think Jim had bought back a bottle of Jose Cuervo Especial from I don't know, one of the trips he'd been on, and me and Dean sat there. One of our mates sat there and just drank the whole bottle, and felt absolutely horrendous. And it was like, all right, back to beers for me, and then never really drank it until I would have been 21 or 22 when I arrived to Mexico, and then sort of started digging into it and found out there was a whole heap more to it than we thought in Australia. So that was sort of the beginning of the journey to start Tromba. Was 2005 when me and Eric lived together and we drank heaps of tequila in that house. And then it sort of kept. Then he went back to Canada. Then I went back to Australia, and then I sort of came back, and I was working in PwC in Mexico in 2008. So that was my first job outside of uni. It was in a big accounting firm here in Guadalajara. And because given the nature of Guadalajara, some of the biggest companies in the city are the big tequila brands. So a bunch of my boss's clients were Tequila Patron and Tequila Sauza, and so I started to work on those. Visit a few of the distilleries as part of that job, and then one day a dude who I was working with came up to me and was like, "Hey Nick, me and a few of my mates are starting a tequila brand. Do you want to get in on it?" I was like, "Oh, that sounds like a cool idea." I really like tequila. I learned a bunch about it, and I drank a lot of it, and would like to learn more about it. So I gave Jimmy a call in Australia and Eric a call in Canada, and sort of what do you guys reckon about this site? It was initially about to do something with these guys, and then that meeting actually never happened, which is most people would be unsurprised to hear. Or it's a lot of people say they're going to do a lot of things and don't do anything. But so basically me, Eric and Jimmy were like, all right, well, why don't we just do it ourselves then? And then we sort of talked about whether we should do our own brand or whether we should just take another brand. And then we were like, well, if, we didn't very know much about what we were doing. So it was a bit like the general idea was like, well, if we're going to tell a story about tequila, we might as well try and tell it our version of the story.
Yeah, because at one stage, I do remember that you were just planning on taking a premium brand within Mexico that hadn't really made it outside the country yet, right? And just kind of bringing that to Australia and kind of just importing it, right?
Yeah, I think at the start it was like maybe do one or the other, and then I think in the end it was do both. And I was like, oh, we might be starting our own brand and take another brand at the same time. And then, we were a couple of 26-year-olds who had no experience in the booze industry, so no one was really that keen for us to take their brand, which is probably fair enough. So we sort of started looking into how we would do our own brand, and that's sort of we started looking we didn't really know what we were doing, but we got a few things right, which was like we were like, all right, well, we don't want to just buy tequila, we want to find some dudes who are really good at making it on the ground and getting them to be the partners. So we started talking to Marco. We talked to a bunch of different people, and then Marco, with the pedigree that he had with, so Marco's our partner and master distiller, and Rodrigo's his son. So
how was that? How did that relationship begin? Like, what was your first introduction to Marco, and how did you develop that?
Well, we were sort of Rodrigo, who's so Marco's son was in this. He studied at the same university that Eric and I went on exchange to. So it was sort of like within the circle, and then we started speaking to him, and then started speaking to Don Julio's grandson, who was another mate, and then ended up talking to Juan Pablo Gonzalez, which is Don Julio's grandson, speaking to him, and then him sort of connecting us with Rodrigo and Marco, and then having over the course of a few months having discussions about what could happen and how it could work, and then that was sort of late 2008. So I moved back to Australia and started 2009. And when I went back, me, Jimmy, Eric, and Marco and Rodrigo, who we'd already decided to work together with a very loose structure. And then it was sort of 2009 when I was back in Australia, and then me, Jimmy, and Eric wrote the plan to kick it off, and then we sort of raised that initial hit of cash off family and friends, and we sort of started in. We were lucky to have people close to us back us in, and then it was in early 2010 we produced our first batch.
So at this stage, when you're in the early development of creating the company, creating the brand, did you have any idea in the back of your mind as to what you wanted to build it to? Like, did you have? I mean, yes, you have your business plan, but what did the future kind of look like? Did you have any idea of, is this going to be just a side hustle the whole time? Is it going to be something that I really want to move into and do full time and just dying to get out of PwC? What did it look like?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of grey. So I think now with a lot more experience, it's just in business in general. It's like it's so important. And I tell people starting businesses, like it's so important to know what success is. So it's like if you're going to start a gin brand or whatever, and you say, I'm going to launch and this year I'm going to do 10,000 cases, and like if that's completely unrealistic, then you'll set yourself up to fail before you've even started. Whereas if you're like, you know what, if I start with 1,000 cases this year, that would be a good result. And so back then we had no idea. Like we had no idea like what was good, like how many cases is good and how many cases is bad. So that part in terms of like what we wanted to build it with, I think was like we were pretty naive. I didn't really had any idea. But yeah, I think we just we wanted to. I was working at PwC. Was never really. I like working there and learn a lot, but I was always had the idea to work for myself or work in a team. And I've since learned that you never work for yourself because there's always a boss, whether it's the tax office or the investors or the customers or someone's always telling what to you do, telling you what to do, even if you think you are the boss. But yeah, it was something. At the time, tequila, part of the proposition was like we really liked it, and so I suppose like the emotional side of it was like we had seen another side of it, and we sort of fell in love with the Highlands because it was such a beautiful place, and like the backstory of tequila. When you learn about it, it's something like that a lot of people fall in love with. So that was one part of it, and then so the business side was like, well, Patron was the premium tequila in the US that sort of set the standard for at that time was selling a lot more than any of the other ones, but just the nature of the tequila industry and the fact that it's made from a limited resource and the agave plant, and the fact that the way Mexico's traditionally done business is to just look up and do it with the US is like, it was like basically premium tequila was popular in the United States and that was it. And so being from Canada and Australia, we were like, well, that trend, like a lot of trends, is going to filter out and be popular in other countries. So that was sort of just like a general premise for it, that like, well, if in Australia, we're in Canada, and like, if we launch a premium tequila we think talks to those markets, then we could be successful because, we think that trend's going to go there. It's eventually going to filter out the US. So that was sort of the general idea behind it on a very high level.
When you look at the US as being, like the biggest tequila market in the world, and those trends slowly making their way elsewhere to other countries, because premium tequila has only been really a thing for call it 40 years, 50 years?
Well, Marco made the first, he was involved, well, not involved, he made the first batch of Don Julio in 1988. So that was literally the batch of tequila that started to premiumize the tequila industry. So there's a pretty defined date, but like 1988, so what's that, 31, 32 years ago. So yeah, premium tequila is that the tequila industry in itself is very old. And like if you're in the mezcal industry, it's potentially thousands of years old.
Yeah.
But the premium tequila category, it's quite young. It's only sort of 30 years old.
So I guess you were coming into it at a time where, at least where we came from in Australia, everyone's got that shocking tequila story when they were growing up, and then they never went back and touched the stuff.
Yeah, I think it was a combination of things. It was also, certain brands obviously lead the way. Patron led the way, even though that when they first started, they tried to separate themselves from being tequila. It was like, I can't remember some of their slogans, but I was like, drink Patron, not tequila, and stuff like that. So they initially tried to separate themselves from the category because it had such a bad rap. They've since now very much, joined the category many years later. But it wasn't, I think just tequila on its own wasn't what was going to make premium tequila popular. It was more so, maybe not more so, but definitely in parallel, it was the fact that Mexican cuisine, so Mexican food culture, was becoming popular at the same time. So it was like it went from being purely Tex-Mex to places like La Esquina in New York being like 2000 late 2009. So I don't know exactly what year La Esquina opened, but like that new wave of Mexican food, or like let's say more, not necessarily more authentic, because it's not more authentic, but it's more just like a more refined version of Mexican food was becoming popular. And that, that trend, I think, started in New York, and then that trend also went out with it. And like, so if you're trying to have a high-end Mexican food concept, obviously you're going to go for a high-end Mexican bar concept as well. And obviously then tequilas and mezcals tie in with that. And so, these, especially the smaller brands, rode that wave. And that definitely happened in Australia. And that we were lucky that trend, which I mentioned La Esquina because it had a big influence on taking that trend to Australia, because Matty Lane, who one of the owners and founders of Mamacita in Melbourne, he worked at La Esquina, and he brought that culture back to Melbourne. He opened Mamacita in, I think it was early 2010. And it was a roaring success. And it was sort of like, from what I remember, it was like sort of Australian hospitality industry sort of looked at it for a year and was like, oh, this is a bit weird. What's this Mexican thing? And it was like, oh, geez, that place is literally has a line out the door, so like 6 or 7 days a week. And then a lot of places started to open up, and that was sort of with that. So our first year of having Tromba in Australia, much like Eric's first year or two in Toronto, was difficult because we didn't really have anyone to sell to, because no one really wanted to buy a premium tequila. So it was like us and a couple of other brands, Tequila Ocho and the guys from Brown Forman and Herradura. We were out there really pushing that education piece. But it wasn't until that new wave of Mexican food started to hit off with places like Barrio Mexico in Sydney, and then the Fondas open up, and apologies for everyone I'm forgetting for having cooked my brain over the years, but sort of that kicked off in 2011, and then it became a lot easier for us, because not easy but easier, because those places started to go on, and they're like they would start to become very popular. So people would come and they would learn about tequila, and they'd learn about Tromba, and so the first couple of years were difficult. I remember Paramount, which is the main now the biggest independent wholesaler in Australia, but at the time was the main on-premise wholesaler in Australia in Melbourne. Remember they would very generously put us on after we got into a few bars, and I remember the first month we were in Paramount, we sold 9 bottles.
9.
We were like, 9 bottles. Like, that was me and Jim, banging around town, doing, probably visiting 60 bars, and 60 bars a fortnight between us, and we sold 9 bottles. And we were like, oh, geez, maybe we've made a real wrong turn here. But we obviously kept going. And it seems like, it was quite a long time. It was a couple of years, and Eric in Canada, the way the Canadian system works is that it's government controlled. So until you get it's called a general listing, which is sort of a full listing with the state board, you got to do these things called private orders, where you have to basically go around to all the bars and be like, hey, I've got this product. Do you want to buy a case of it? It'll be here in a couple of months, but you need to commit to it now.
Right.
And so it's a very difficult way of doing business. He did a really good job in building that to a point where he was doing these private orders, until the point was the LCBO was like, oh, I'll give you a general listing. And I can't remember how long he could tell you how long it was. It was at least a year or two before of hustling before he actually got to a point where we had proper distribution. So, and with Australia, it was a lot of just charging around town, a lot of making mistakes, a lot of now many years later, we know that the proper strategy is if you're going to go to a city, literally concentrate on one suburb, even a couple of block radius, and then put all your effort into that and let it filter out. Whereas me and Jim were charging around Australia and flying to Hobart and flying to Perth, and just a lot of silly strategic mistakes you make at the beginning. Obviously, there's nothing.
But one of the key strategies early on was, it's all about education, right? And you were very focused on educating from within the hospitality industry, so your bartenders, your restaurant owners, and get them on side in order to then pass on that education to your average punter that's going into one of these venues.
Yeah, we were lucky that we got we made a lot of mistakes at the beginning, and still do, but we got some key pieces of advice that really sent us in the right direction. And I think one of those key ones was, so Andy McMahon, your stepbrother, he was mates with Matty Djokovic, wasn't he? Matt Djokovic, who'd walked for 42 below. So we were lucky to have a bit of guidance from those guys, and it was a pretty different time. What they did, and the way they did it was different, but their advice was focus on the trade. Mm. So one very simple piece of advice, which was obviously not being very powerful, and 10 years later, it's fun enough. We often have chats with our advisory board now about how we're really good at the trade part now, because that's what we started off doing, and we're not as good at talking to consumers and telling our stories on a sort of a mass scale. We're very good at telling it on bar to bar.
Yeah,
that was just the way. That's just sort of the way the brand grew up. So yeah, we got that advice at the beginning, which was obviously just basically like turning us around, putting us in the right direction, and just pushing us into the unknown. And so me, Jimmy and Eric just, grabbed a bottle and just charged around town. I was on my scooter for many years, charging around delivering boxes and basically going around. Basically the strategy was, education and telling people the story and telling people where it came from. It was tough. I was reminded the other day that by Kieran Bailey, who's another mentor of ours, who's a guy who owns a few bars in Sydney, who'd been in the brand, the alcohol brand game for a long time, and he was the brand ambassador for Grand Marnier in London for a long time, and he taught us a lot of the ropes about how to do it and how to engage and how to communicate with bartenders and stuff. And he's sorry, let's get some people yelling out the front. But he reminded me the other day that when we first started, we weren't really able to use Marco's name, because part of us, when we first started, was Marco was still working for the Gonzalez family and he was building that distillery, and he was still very much involved there, and they didn't want him to use his name and so on.
That's right. I forgot about that.
So I think so we could tell people about him, but we couldn't really use it in any like printed material and stuff. And we also didn't know his full story about what he had achieved, not the fact that his full role in bringing to life the premium tequila category, because it was sort of hidden behind that story was hidden behind family politics. So it was like. So it was a lot harder back then, because so it was basically like, it was just definitely an education strategy. Like, do a lot of trainings, tell a lot of bartenders. Hope the bartenders fall in love with not just the brand but also the category, so that then they go and push it behind the bar. It's a strategy you need to be very patient with, because it takes a long time, and it's something where you really got to love what you do, because it is like you really just like bartenders are. It's a very passion-driven trade. So it's like if you do it and you love it and you go and you learn, it is a big, now I own a bar here. We have the agave here in Guadalajara, and so, we're, very much even more so part of the industry. And it's like, if you're not really passionate about it, then it's, you might as well go do something else. So that's really what when we talk about a trade strategy in the booze game. It's really just about passionate people talking to other passionate people. It's really what it goes down to.
And what do you think was what was the tipping point where you realised, all right, because you stayed you were still doing your full-time job for how many years after the company started? It was at least 3 or 4 years, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't as long. If I was smart, I would have done it for 3 or 4 years. But I left. I don't remember exactly how long, but sometime between 6 and 9 months later.
Oh, that was it.
Yeah, it was pretty naive decision. If I had been able to work out how to balance it better, it would have been a better way of approaching it. If I just keep learning in PwC where I was, and also have a more stable wage. But there's benefits as well. It was like just go straight into it and just straight into the risk game.
No choice.
Either sell some boxes or don't eat. So it's a good way to learn quickly in the
nice bit of motivation.
Yeah, and then you make a mistake and you pay for it. You pay hard for it. You make a mistake, and whether it's a container coming late or a bar, backing a bar that ends up going back, going under, and you don't get the money back, and like you pay because you the next money to pay the rent with. So it's not a very pleasant way of doing it, but you certainly learn quickly.
Well, what was that point? I didn't get to it earlier. What was the tipping point after you'd left? The company's up and running. What was that point where you're like, shit, I think we actually could have something here. This is going well. Where did that happen for you?
I don't know the exact point. Well, so I mean, between all of us who are involved in the brand, there's a lot of stubborn personalities in there. So it was or maybe more so than any really rational signals of like, oh, there might be something here. It was more just like we're not going to rest until this is a success, and we've paid back those people who are kind enough to back us at the beginning. So that was a lot of my motivation, was like, you know, when someone invests in your business, I think it's very, it's the ultimate trust, right? It's like, you know, here's my hard-earned cash, which I have gone out and I have, you know, I've worked really hard for. I've paid taxes on, and I'm giving it to you to try and make something awesome and give me some of that cash back, or give it all back and way more someday. So, you know, it's one big motivator. And, you know, that, you know, and for those who invested in the business I'm involved in, and sometimes haven't communicated as well as probably should have, or definitely should have, at least they can then know that my one of my big motivations is to make sure that they do get their cash back. And so, when there was a specific point that we think it could be a success? I mean, I don't know. Looking back, it was definitely, you know, the way the global tequila market works is that the US market is, you know, 18, probably might have been 20 million cases now, of which a whole bunch is premium. So it's a whole bunch is sold at a good price point. And then you've got the Mexican market, which is about 8 million cases, which is a lot, is most of which is sold at a very low price point. And then, you know, you've got a bunch, you know, I think I actually saw that Australia just hit the top 5. I think it's like
top 5 markets in the world.
Yeah, top 5 export markets. So I suppose that would make it the top 6 markets. So yeah, I think in there Spain, Germany, Canada, and I think Russia's the other one. So when we went to the US, knowing those numbers, it was like, if, you know, that was part of the reason that Jimmy moved to the US, and, you know, Eric started spending less time in Canada and more time in the US, was because, you know, the LA, just the LA tequila market is around about 5 times as big as the Australian tequila market. So
unbelievable.
If you're going to make a business of it, it's got to be very difficult to do it outside of the US. So I suppose the point where I personally was like, oh shit, we might have something here, was when, and this was actually, you know, I wasn't really involved in this, well, apart from a strategic level, but, you know, it was Jimmy and Eric on the ground in the US, and, you know, Jimmy in Canada, Jimmy in Chicago, and then Eric pushing hard in New York with Heather Ash, who we had on the ground there. When they start to when the brand started to get some momentum in those markets, then I was like, you know, we do have something here, because that's where, if the brand's connecting to the biggest market in the world, then it's worth, you know, sacrificing our lives even more to do so. So, and, you know, at that point, you know, it's probably, you know, we didn't pay ourselves for, I don't remember how long, 5, 6, 7 years. So, you know, we just took out enough to live, and not even enough to do that. So it was like, it was very much faith for many years for it, that it was going to work. And, you know, fortunately, you know, still a lot more work to do, but I'd say now that even though we haven't given a return to those who invested, the brand, and, you know, and that's the overall aim of any business, but we're definitely at a point now where we've had an impact, and the story of Tromba has had an impact on a bunch of different tequila markets in a positive way. And, you know, part of the reason for being for the brand was, you know, as we talked about, is the fact that, you know, we wanted to go out there and change people's opinion of tequila, and you know, not even, and, you know, maybe there's people who love tequila, but maybe it's still a different side of it. So it's like we've sort of taken on that job of, like, you know, Marco came back to the tequila industry in 1983 after, you know, starting 10 years earlier, and came back, and, you know, he wanted to change the way the industry was, and you know, worked hard and took a risk to produce the first batch of premium tequila, to change people's perception of tequila. And sort of, you know, the mission of our company and our brand continues to be that. So we want to change the way people think about tequila. And that sort of, when we first started, you know, 10 years ago, there was a lot of mixto tequila around. So part of our challenge, and those of some other of the cooler brands, was, you know, get people to drink 100% agave tequila, not mixto tequila. And then, you know, 10 years later, that challenge has changed, because there is mostly 100% agave tequila, but then there's there's been invented other shortcut ways of making tequila. So, with the additives and all that sort of stuff. So it's sort of our aim and our goal for the brand continues to be the same, which is to continue Marco's journey to challenge the way the industry is producing tequila and make sure that we're trying to have an industry that's producing our juice with the most integrity possible. We have a plant that takes 6, 8, 10 years to grow, and you want that end product to taste like that because the earth has made a sacrifice to produce that plant for you, and we should be, as part of the tequila industry, should be trying to take that work, put it into the bottle, and tell drinkers, tell the story to the drinkers through our juice. So
it's definitely an important message because do you feel that the tequila brand market is it getting a little oversaturated? I mean, you see over the last, I don't know, call it 10 years, you've probably seen a lot of celebrity brands pop up. Do you think these celebrity brands are bringing something more to to bring awareness to tequila in general, or is it all just a bunch of bullshit and just celebrities trying to make a buck?
The way I sell it is the way I tell it. Well, the way I think it is like I don't have a problem with celebrity brands as such, but I think that as a tequila industry, that we need to be, starting with the basics. It's not made from a seasonal crop. That it's not made from corn or grain, which comes out every year. It's made from a plant that takes 8 years to grow, and you need to respect that. Mm-hmm. So, as a general concept, if you have a plant that takes 8 years to grow, it shouldn't be cheap. Just like without getting into the specifics of different brands and stuff, just as an industry, it shouldn't be cheap because there's a lot of effort that goes into producing that raw material. And I think that what the mistake has been made, obviously the original tequila guys who in 1974 who produced the denomination of origin, they did a good job of making tequila a global household name. They made it one of the well spirits. So it's like, every bar, most bars in the world, they have 5 things in a well, and tequila is one of them. So, they did a great job doing that. I think that mistakes were made in terms of choosing one type of agave and, some of the way that it was produced. It wasn't maybe, we weren't thinking about the future when we're harvesting tequila. But if we forget about harvesting agave, when we forget about that for a minute, and just as a general concept, we have this spirit that takes, let's say 8 years to grow. Therefore, we as an industry should be telling that story and should not be competing on price. So we shouldn't be trying to sell tequila for $10 a litre in the United States, because that's not what the spirit's about. So as a general concept, as an economic concept, you can either sell 10 bottles for $10 each, you make 100 bottle and make $100, or you can sell 1 bottle and make $100 by selling more expensive. That's a very simplistic way of looking at it.
Right.
But I think that it's a sort of a race to the bottom, and I think that the tequila industry, given the fact that without generalising too much to my Mexican paisanos, is like the way that business is done in Mexico traditionally is a lot of commodity-based selling. So it's like I make something, I sell it. I make something, I sell it without sort of looking at the storytelling and building the brand of it. So I think that going back to the original question of the celebrity brands, it's like, if there's a celebrity brand that is just trading off tequila as a name, doesn't give a shit about how it's made, makes it in a really poor way, and is just in there to just make as much cash as possible, then yes, I do have a problem with a celebrity brand because it's not contributing to the overall industry. Mm-hmm. But if you have a celebrity brand or any brand which is respecting the plant with which it's made from, the integrity of the product, and working to try to push the price band of tequila up. And that's not to push the price point up. That's not just to put more money into the pockets of the brand owners, but that's to put more money into the pockets of everyone along the supply chain.
Right.
So those who plant the agave, those farm workers, who go out there and work the fields, they should make more money. The humidors should make more money. The people in the distillery should make more money. Everyone along the supply chain should make more money because it is a labour-intensive product and it shouldn't be cheap. Like I get it. I get the fact that, the way economics works is there is a market for people who just want cheap piss. That's the way the work works. And that's fine. But it's our job as an industry to educate the market as much as possible to the fact that, it's a product that shouldn't be cheap because of the nature of the way it's made.
Yeah.
And so if you're buying, be conscious of the fact that if you're buying a bottle of tequila for, $15 in the US or $20 or wherever, that flows all the way down to the dude tending the agave field isn't making as much money as he should be because that product shouldn't be a label in the market for that cheap. And if it is that cheap, one thing is someone's not getting paid correctly, or this plant that's taken 8 years to grow has not been respected in the process of making the product. There's the two only options of how you could have a cheap product. Because right now, if we look at the economics of tequila, a kilo of agave costs about 30 pesos, which is, let's convert that to US dollars, $1.50. To produce a tequila in a proper manner, it takes you about 8 kilos. A litre of tequila at 55%. So 8 times $1.50, that's $12. So there's $12 US of agave going into each litre of tequila produced. So, like, if you're buying a bottle or if you're buying a litre for $10, you should be asking how that happened. And maybe it's because the person who has the brand owns that agave and they're passing you on that discount because they're not putting that $30 on. But maybe it's because it's not being made in the right way. And maybe it's because the people who, tended that agave for 8 years in the field, maybe they didn't get paid properly. And I think, that's where we have a more global outlook now as consumers. And, we're very, with that fair trade and looking after the environment and all that sort of stuff. And it's like, at the end of the day, like, you're paying for a cheap tequila. Do you think anyone's worried about looking after the environment when they're producing that agave? Like, do you think they're worried about looking after the humidors and the guys who tended the fields, or the person who put that in the bottle? Well, probably not. That's really. Oh, that's why someone's yelled. Someone just crashed in front of my house there. I can see from my hammock view. Sorry, I digress. But yeah, so I think that's back to your original question. Is like, I don't think it really matters if it's that crowded, as long as people are conscious of promoting the category in the right way.
Well, one of the biggest, one of the biggest celebrity brands, and the sale of it was so heavily publicized, was Casamigos, with George Clooney and what's his face?
Sidney Crawford's husband.
Yeah.
Decent claim to fame. Randy Gerber is name.
Yeah. That was because I remember talking to some other people about when that deal happened, and some people saying, "Oh, well, this is just a celebrity brand. It's overpriced, blah blah blah. Like, can't believe it's selling for $1 billion." But at the same time, it's probably benefiting the industry as a whole to further highlight some of these boutique labels and to kind of prop up the industry a bit. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, if you look at two parts of it, we'll look at the business, the business part, and then look at the communication part of it. So, I mean, I think from a business perspective, I think it was very positive because, if you look at anything, craft beer or craft gin or craft tequila or whatever, there's a lot of like, oh, those guys sold out. They sold that brand. And now I don't like because they sold out. It's like, me, for someone involved in this, it's like, it's great when people sell out because it means that those who are trying to start a new little one have an example for the potential investors to say, look, you can make some money off it.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, if there's not those examples, the only people who are allowed to start booze brand are the really wealthy people or big companies, because people like us, without look at our story, like we had no money when we started, so we had to go and ask people to believe in our dream and ask them to give it to us, and a lot of that was like, one day we'll give you your money back, and whether that means someone might buy the brand or in our case, hopefully we'll get it to a point where it makes money, and and you can have it for 100 years. But you need those examples of success for an investor to back you in. So from a business perspective, I think it was great for the tequila industry that George Clooney sold that brand for $1 billion, because it made a lot of people interested in the category. And so for those of us who are trying to raise money to continue to grow our brands, was a great thing, because people are a lot more interested in like people with cash were a lot more interested in the category now. So that was a positive thing. And then from the sort of the communication side, I think it was like, there's a lot of, the mistake that people make is like, there's a lot of celebrity brands out there and most of them aren't successful. Like there's a lot of spirits brands that start in the world every year, thousands and thousands and thousands, and a very few make it to any kind of scale. So, the fact that Clooney and Gerber, they got that right. It was really well positioned, and it was like sort of the way you look at it, you have the functional benefits of a brand, which is like, does it taste good and how is it made? And you have the emotional benefits. This is like, I'm drinking this shit because George Clooney drinks it. That makes me feel good, because that makes me feel like I'm really successful because I'm like George Clooney. So if you look at that sort of scale and like that craft scale, it was like, Casamigos is an aspirational brand. It's like, two of the two very famous dudes. It's like, we're all friends and look how we live our lives. You want to live our lives like us? Because it's really cool how we live our lives.
Yeah.
And then they just put a touch of craft in there. So, like the bottle is very positioned in a craft way. It's not really a craft product. Like for me, we talk a lot of Tromba, what does craft mean? Well, as a start, a craft product needs to be made by a craftsman. Just as a general concept, right? And
makes sense.
We have a craftsman who makes our products. We don't have a million people on Instagram that follow us, so it makes it a bit harder. But if you look at that, who makes Casamigos? Who fucking knows who makes Casamigos? I've got no idea who makes it. Probably a bunch of different distilleries makes it, but so it's sort of in that way, it's not really a craft product, because it's not really about where it came from. But at the same time, they thought, a lot of the imagery was about the agave fields and stuff. So there was a superficial sort of way that they were talking about where it came from. Mm. So that's positive. In something to take the positive, it's more positive than negative. It's like, they were telling people about the agave and stuff like that. So that was a mass audience that knows a little bit more about tequila, how the way tequila is made, than they did previously. And I think now, and as a result of that, as things goes on, it moves down the innovation curve, and now, like knowledge about how tequila made, where it comes from, is a bit more mainstream now. So that means that the next brand that starts can push a bit harder and become a bit nerdy and become a bit craftier, because there will be a bigger audience that will connect with that. So yeah, I think overall it was a positive thing for the industry, and then it was definitely positive for The Rock, because it set him up, and then so he launched his brand Terramana, and from what we understand, that has been way more successful that launch than the Casamigos one.
Well, they built their own distillery, didn't they?
I think they're in the process of building their own distillery. I don't think they have their own distillery. I think they communicated that they did, but I think that was a bit of the selling of smoke and mirrors more than anything.
Yeah, I think it's no secret that someone like Dwayne Johnson has always been a fan of tequila, and I think that story's been a bit easy to digest, because you can kind of really you get his passion, and that really seems to flow through to the brand that he's launched with his partners. It's just when it's when you come up come across people like, your Kendall Jenners of the world, where it doesn't really seem to be coming from a real passionate place, or, someone wanting to tell a story of a product that they're just, so into that they want to share it with the world. It seems like it's coming from somewhere else.
Yeah, I find it really weird. The tequila industry is it's tricky. I mean, if I was rich and famous, I'd be starting a rum brand, because I'd just be going to the Caribbean to hang out and drink rum on tropical islands. It's weird they all want to start a tequila brand, but from our point of view, we don't really. I mean, it doesn't really. It's probably a positive thing more than anything for us. For us, when I'm talking about the small craft brands, because again, it just gives more publicity to the category. People might learn a little bit more about it, and then a mainstream consumer might be like, I'd like to learn a little bit more about this category, and then they'll dig in. And once they dig in a little bit, they found out that it's the same thing. Kendall Jenner is positioned as a craft product, but you can't have a craft product without a craftsman. Same premise. So it's and then, those people might come into the craft area, but really the type of consumer that is drinking Kendall Jenner's tequila is a very different consumer than who's drinking Tequila Tromba or Tequila Fortaleza.
Right.
This is a consumer who wants to know where their product comes from. They want to know where it comes from. They want to know who makes it. They want to connect with the passion of the people. They're passionate about the category, and they want to connect with other people about passionate about the category. And they're not fooled by The Rock or by Kendall Jenner, thinking that they're super passionate about the thing and they're doing everything with integrity.
Mm.
And do you know what? I don't know enough about the brand. I'm not tipping shit on those brands. I don't know how they make it. So maybe they'd make it really well. I don't know, but probably not. We're in the middle of it. These brands are growing incredibly quickly.
Yeah,
we're in the middle of an agave crisis where it's incredibly hard to find good quality raw material. We hardly can find it to grow our little brand. So I'm not sure how people are doing it to grow, brands that are 10, 15 times as big as us.
So the agave market at the moment, there's a severe shortage and prices are just skyrocketing.
Yeah, it's a very unsophisticated market in terms of no one really controls it. So basically, what happened in 2001, it was extremely expensive, just a natural cycle, and then a lot of people got rich, and people up in the highlands and farmers here, it's there's a lot of distrust of the government and banks and stuff. So if they make a bunch of cash, they don't put it in their super fund or put it in their retirement fund or put it into shares. They buy more land and plant more shit. So when there was so much money flying around, they just planted heaps and heaps and heaps. And then fast forward, 7 or 8 years, when all that agave's matured and it's worth nothing because there's way more than that the industry can consume. And then the cycle starts again in reverse because no one's got any cash, no one plants anything. And then 8 years later, it's worth shitloads again. So it's sort of 2008 to 2012, it was sort of really, really cheap, too cheap. And nothing was really done to stop the cycle again. So 8 years later, it was probably, I can't remember the exact date, probably 2017, I think it started to really spike hard. So for the last 4 years, it's been worth 30 pesos. To put that in perspective, that's $1.50 US. When we first started, we bought it 3 pesos. So, it's gone up 10 times. So
Nice.
it's been sitting at that for 4 years now. So it's no one, apart from the agave farmers or those who have their own agave, which we unfortunately didn't because we never had enough money to plant any agave we would now, but now there's no point because it's too expensive. So in theory, the economic cycle says it'll drop in the next year or two, and then it will be easier for brands, and hopefully we'll find an equilibrium where the agave farmers can make enough money, and the brands make enough money, so that it's an industry with a bit of equilibrium.
So looking at Tromba and moving forward with the brand, what are you most excited about on the horizon for Tequila Tromba?
A lot of in the spirits game in general is it's a race for credibility. So it's like, it's not that, there's a bunch of good brands out there, but, who operates the best and who's the one who looks like it has the best chance of making it to a lot of bars and a lot of houses around the world. So it's, and a lot of that is about finding distribution. So it's like you get to a point where you've sort of proven yourself, and a big distributor or medium distributor or some distributor will be like, all right, let's take these guys on board and feed them into our network. And because, they're very different operations. Like growing a brand is a lot about obviously producing it, but then it's a lot about just marketing and positioning and sales and telling the story. It's about storytelling more than anything, which is very different than, than the distribution part, which is having trucks and going around and collecting cash off bars. So what I'm most excited about is, in the US, we've just got on board with earlier this year with 375 Park, which is a subsidiary of Sazerac company, which is a big US spirits house, biggest producer of bourbon in the world. So they're doing a great job of getting the brand out there. So it's an exciting time for us, and the fact that instead of like going out there and just hitting the streets and trying to get, tell the story of the brand and get people to buy some boxes, now at a point now where we have a good partner doing that for us. So we get to have the luxurious part of trying to, work to tell the story more, and then, bring the product out and maybe build a distillery. And so I think we're definitely into after a long time of some pretty solid hard yards. I think it's an exciting time. And same as Australia, we've tried a bunch of different structures in Australia, and then now we're with Craft Revolution, and they're doing a great job in Australia. So, similar things. Just having to worry about telling the story and making good juice is far more entertaining. It's far more fun than having to charge around town.
Since being in Mexico, I mean, you've gone beyond just the tequila brand itself. I mean, you're now well entrenched in the hospitality industry of Guadalajara. Tell us a bit about the bar and cafe that you've opened up there.
So we moved back here in 2000. So the cafe came first. We moved back here in 2015. It was like, without going into too much, it was a basic concept. It was like we'd taken something from Mexico and taken it to Australia. My two countries of my two home countries, and then obviously Melbourne coffee culture being as strong as it is, like, well, let's take a chunk of Melbourne and take that to Guadalajara. So that's basically the concept for the cafe. And then so Freddie, who's a mate from Melbourne, who I knew, he was a barista, so he came on initially just to consult on the bar. So I did consult on the cafe, and then ended up staying and become a partner in the bar, in the cafe, and then we opened the bar together with the help of great Amelia Boot and Ella Mulvihill, some great Melbourne hospitality characters.
Mm-hmm.
And basically the concept of the bar was, I got back here, and in Guadalajara, just basically you couldn't find any of the small brands. It was like they were all selling in the US because it was just too hard here. And it was basically just like, I was just sort of pissed me off a bit, to be honest. And I was like, all right, well, we rented this beautiful space for the cafe, and there was like, we didn't need all of it. And there was this beautiful balcony, and then there was another downstairs area. And we sort of debated which part to put the bar in, and Freddie said put on the balcony, which is the right decision. So we put on the balcony, and then so we basically opened a bar, which was the initial proposition was just support small tequila brands. And then we then adapted agave distillates from just Jalisco, just from our state. So it's a very specific concept. So it's basically tequila and agave distillates. And that's, pretty proud of what we've done there. It's been a hard road. It's like one of those, we'll just start a bar because, we want to support the craft tequila brands. And it's not quite as easy as that in Mexico. There's a lot of different layers to it. And after a couple, after probably nearly 3.5 years in now, and obviously we can probably subtract a year of COVID, but so it took a couple of years to work out how to do it without it being a real pain in the ass. So yeah, proud of we've had a pretty solid impact here, and there's a few bars around town now that have good tequila and raicilla selections, and we were definitely a part of that. So that's a bit of a tick of the box of like our contribution to our industry of like, support the small brands and not just put your money where your mouth is. We could easily, like everyone else, just take a heap of cash off the big companies because it's a pretty popular bar. But we've stuck to our integrity and still continue to support the small brands.
And you've got that. What's the new bar you've opened up in the basement?
It's called. It doesn't really. It's sort of just called Los de Abajo, which means those from down below or something like that. And it's it's just a cool little space where it was a cellar that was used. It's been there we discovered it after probably 80 years, and it was full of dirt when we found it. And they think that it was used to hide people during the Cristero Wars and the Revolution and stuff. So it's got a pretty unique feel to it. And we've turned it into it's really Freddie's baby, and it's a concept where we've hand selected and gone round to a bunch of different mezcal producers in the region, and basically bought liters off them and brought it down. So it's a cool little space to learn about agave distillate specifically from our part of the country.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one thing that's been an interesting process is I've led up the Mexican sales department. So I've been charged of selling Tromba in Mexico,
right?
Which has been an extremely interesting experience. It's been it's pretty tricky. And people go, "Oh, there's a lot of brands. There's a lot of brands. There's more brands in the US than there is in Australia. Than there is in Mexico." But it's been very difficult, to be honest. It was just convincing Mexicans to like basically getting our team to teach Mexicans about where it comes from and how it's made and all that stuff. Basically the same thing that we've done in Australia, just in a weirder context. Just because you would assume that everyone Mexicans know how tequila's made. Most don't.
Exactly.
Very honest. It's been another labour of love. Don't sell a lot of boxes here, but we have a good little team that tries really hard. So it's been an interesting experience just trying to basically get Mexicans to drink nicer tequila more than anything.
Well, I mean, like you were saying earlier about places to actually go and drink tequila in Mexico that actually have these, local kind of, craft brands. If they don't exist, people can't find it. Like,
where do you try it?
Where do you go? I mean, like if you go to like a traditional cantina in Guadalajara, you're drinking. I mean, you're drinking beers and like, are you actually getting these very specific local craft brands, like maybe one or two of them, or is it just more a down the line, bigger, one of the bigger Don Julio labels, something like that? Oh, so sorry, Jose Cuervo.
Yeah, mate. Up until recently, it's been pretty much mostly just traditional brands. So most of the big brands. But now you're starting to see a little bit of that filter through of like Castle Wind's done a really good job in Guadalajara, so that's starting to get out there a lot more. So that's starting to be being found very widely, which is great. Hopefully that leads the way from some of the other small brands. But it's starting to change a little bit. But yeah, if you go to a traditional cantina, generally won't have any craft products.
Because it's just not the clientele, right? Or is it something else?
Well, I mean, it can be the clientele. If it's, a lot of them are going to drink what they've always drunk, and that's fine. Just like most of us, most people drink the same beer they were drinking since they started drinking. But I think, same thing. It's like as that macro movement comes through and start to tell the story, and then if you convince the old dudes in the cantinas, like, oh, yeah, you should try this one, put a bit of effort in, then they'll probably start telling the story too, and they'll convince some other people. So I think there's potential there. It's just really hard here because like that small craft market, the tax system here makes it really hard. You make really very little money per bottle. And then so it's just like who's willing to make that sacrifice to do all that work to open up the market for everyone else. I mean, we're doing it, and Cask and Wind's doing it, and a few others, but yeah, it's a pretty thankless task because you're pretty much opening the craft tequila market in Mexico for everyone else.
Just seems like, I mean, like everything that comes with, any kind of product, this process of education just takes a long time.
It really does take a long time. It's like that process of organically, like feeding a product into a market, it takes years.
Yeah.
It's years and years. Unless you've got heaps of money, you can do it quicker, but then you've got to know how to do it. So it's like a combination of, and often the people who have all the money are the ones who don't know how to do it. So you give us a bunch of money now, we could probably do it far better. Like, you had to give us a bunch of money at the beginning and probably just wasted it because we know how to do it properly. So,
well, I can't let you go before diving into a few funny things that have happened over the years with the formation of this tequila brand, Tequila Tromba. I mean, I'm sure you've probably got a couple of doozies that have happened to you along the way, but this one actually, this actually involves you directly. Do you remember at the time I was living, or still am, living in Los Angeles, and you call me up and like, look, I need you to come to Tijuana, where we've got boxes of tequila, and it wasn't Tromba. I think you were helping out. Someone was opening a bar in Sydney, was it?
Yeah, some of it was Tromba.
Some of it was Tromba. Now the memory gets a little bit hazy because I get in the car, I drive from Los Angeles down to Tijuana, I cross over into Mexico, and this first time you give me the address of a house. I was a little bit worried at the time because I cross over to Tijuana, everything instantly changes, and I'm like, I'm starting to get a little bit sweaty, and I'm driving around town. You gave me the address to this house, and I knock on the door. They were very friendly, by the way, and that's when I must have picked up a couple of boxes. Maybe there was like 25 bottles. I forget. It wasn't too much, but it was more than the allotment that you were allowed to bring back into the US.
No, it wasn't. So I think it was 150 bottles. And the rule states, I don't know if is the rule. How long ago was this? 5 years ago, right? Maybe longer.
No, but there was two times. So the first time I went back. So I sit in the bloody car line for 3 hours. Get to the front. I declared the bottles, and then said, because I wasn't a resident at the time. I was studying. I was a student, and there was a bit of a loophole where you could bring back the tequila for personal use.
Yeah, 60 litres for non-commercial purposes.
And this guy at the border was like, yeah, fine, yeah, like no worries. So then that was the first one. And then I think a couple of months later, or whenever it was, you're like, I need you to come back down to Tijuana. And that's when this was like 150 bottles, like you say. I met you in the car park of like a 7-Eleven in Tijuana. This sounds so fucking dodgy. And You load me up with tequila.
Yeah, so I'd already done one crossing. So
that's right.
So there's 150 bottles, and so the rule was 60 litres a day. So I think it was a Friday and a Saturday, right? So on the Friday, I crossed over whatever, must have been like 60 bottles or whatever. And I got to the front of it, like driving through in a rental car from San Diego as well. So I get to the front of line up for however many hours, get to the queue, and the guy says to me, "What do you got in the car?" And I said, "Oh, just some tequila." Very special, like very specific choosing of words. And he's like, "Oh, yeah, no worries." And then he just let me go. So he goes, and didn't ask any more questions. I just drove in. So I got in there that night, and then I got there, and it was a Saturday. And I was flying out of LAX that night at like 10 o'clock. And it just happened that day, some dude in LA had murdered a police officer. Which means,
yes. Yeah.
So normally you would just drive straight from Mexico, straight from the US straight to Mexico without even going through any checks. Whereas because this dude had murdered this cop, there was checkpoints going into Mexico, so they were checking every car. So that's when I called you and I was like, mate, I've got 2 trips to do, but I don't think I'm going to be able to do it on my own because there's checkpoints. It's going to take me hours to get into Mexico. Right. Could you do me a favor, drive down and do a trip? I'll do a trip, you do. So I think we drove down. I can't remember if we met in San Diego or I just drove straight in.
I think we did. I think we did meet in San Diego first, and then drove down from memory. Anyway,
so we drove down. We grabbed the rest of the booze, and we just randomly, we put some in your car, some in my car, and then we drove back to the queue to get over the border, which we were never. And we saw. I think I was behind you, and then when we got close to the gates, we split and we went one in one and one in the other because we're like, we don't want to go the same one. 2 Australians crossing Tequila right in the same. So, actually, I stuffed up the story because the important part is it's not true. I didn't drive straight through the day before. I got through and they sent me to second inspection, and I ended up being there for hours and ended up being allowed to go through and paying the duty, which was, I can't remember, it wasn't that much money. It was like $50 or something.
But they said it's like, I'll let you through, but this is like, don't do this again kind of thing, right?
No, they didn't say that. They just let me, like, they were just like, oh, no, okay, no worries, you can do that. Because it's non-commercial purposes. So that's an important part of the story. So when you get up to the gates and you go left and I go right, and then it was the same thing the guy said to me, that's when the guy said to me, what have you got? And I just said some tequila. And he said, no worry. And I just drove straight through. So I drove through it, and you had the address of Ruben's house, my mates, where we were taking you to.
Yeah.
So I get back to Ruben's house, and I ring you, and I can't get onto you. And then I'm like, fuck, what happened? And I waited. I can't remember how long I waited for. I waited for like an hour or so. Maybe I can't remember how long I waited for. But then you eventually called me and like, mate, shit's gone pear-shaped. They're telling me that I have 2 choices. Either they're going to rip up my visa or I need to take this tequila back into Tijuana. And so I was like, and by this time it was probably pretty late because it must have been like already 3 o'clock.
Sun was setting, and I was getting more and more nervous because like I'm going to be stuck in Tijuana on my own after dark with a trunk full of tequila. Well, because when I rolled up to the the customs officer, I think maybe the back suspension of the car was just sitting all the way on the bottom because the whole boot was just full of so many bottles. Because he's like, oh, well, what's in there? I'm like, oh, just a bit of tequila. He's like, all right. I think he said like, oh, how many bottles? I was like, oh, I don't know, like 75. And he looked at me. He's like, what? He's like, nah, it's all good. Just personal use. And he's like, no, that's not going to fly. So, yeah, so they sent me to second inspection, and like they scan the car as well. Yeah. They X-ray the car. So all of a sudden I'm like, oh, maybe someone stuck something else in the car. There could be like kilos of cocaine in the tires. Who knows? Luckily there wasn't. But
for anyone who hasn't been to like that Tijuana San Diego border, it's a fucking tense place. Yeah. And second inspection it's basically just a shed out the back where like people smuggling drugs, smuggling people are like getting busted through X-ray machines. So it's a tense place to be at the best of times.
So, but yeah, that's why I think you couldn't because I think in that little area, I don't think there's any cell signal. I think they purposely cut out the signal or something.
No, I don't think they don't cut it, but like they're very strict on don't use your phone.
Yeah. So I said, so they X-ray the car. You're trying to get a hold of me. I think I'm sitting there. It wasn't maybe it was 45 minutes. I'm waiting, and this guy comes over. He was obviously like a supervisor, or he was one of them, whatever he was. But he comes over and he starts talking to me. And all along, I keep saying like, oh, I'm not a resident. I'm not a resident. He's like, well, you are. When I still claim that I wasn't. But at first he was very nice about it. He's like, look, this is the situation. You have this tequila, blah, blah, blah. And I thought he was about to let me off and say, yeah, look, you can just go through. And all of a sudden, his tone just shifts and it turns into like, you're not coming to the US. Don't ever fucking do this again. And I'm like, oh, God. And then he's like, start your car, follow me. So he's walking in front of the car and I'm just slowly creeping behind him. And he walks me out. There's like this little turnaround area. And he just walks me out and points down back towards Mexico and says, yeah, you can drive it back to Mexico. So I'm like, shit. So I think that's when I actually went back. So I go cross, and this is after spending 3 hours in that bloody car line trying to get back in the US. But that's when I actually got a hold of you. And you then come back down across the border. I then have to, because the guy was like, look, if you try and come back in with this tequila and get caught, like, then we're seriously going to tear your visa up. And then you come across, I then give all the booze to you. And then I go jump back in the 3 hour line and then, get back into Mexico. But then didn't you get caught?
Yeah, so I got back in the queue and then I got to the inspection and was like the same thing. What do you got in there? Just some tequila. How many? Fucking 50 bottles. Everyone's wasn't like second inspection, mate. So when I got to second inspection, it all went pear-shaped and it was like I had my sheet. And I can't remember. I got a bad memory, so I can't remember the exact story. But it was like they were fucking pissed off. They were because I pulled out my sheet saying like non-commercial purpose. See, look here, it says here, and then like what was his name? There was some fucking wanker who was like the head of the second inspection, who like I was like arguing with the dudes like, look, and he came out and he went fucking mental. It was like, you don't want to fuck with me. My name is Marco Sanchez. You don't want to fuck with me. And you fuck with my team. And he's going fucking crazy, this dude. And this is like I've been there for I've been there for hours at this point. Like I'd already when I was in the queue to get back, like it was like I had to be in LAX at like 10 or 9 o'clock or something, and it was like fucking 7 o'clock. So I'd already moved my flight anyway because I knew I was going to make it. And so I was there for I think I was in the second inspection for like 5 hours. And so they were like all these different dudes were coming up. They were fucking going crazy. They'd already confiscated the tequila.
Yeah,
because they were like, luckily, like because they knew I'd been back the day before, and that's what really pissed them off, the fact that I'd done it 2 days in a row.
Yeah, because I thought you actually got like the same person again or something. Like they knew it was you.
No,
who'd done it 2 days in a row.
System. Luckily, they didn't have on record that I'd already been through that day, because otherwise, then I would have been really fucked. But yeah, the people were going. These fucking dudes were going mental, and this one dude fucking hated me because I was like, so they confiscated the tequila, and then they came up and they're like, all right, we're tearing up your visa to the US. You're never coming back in here. And at this stage, I was so tired. I'd been like driving back and forth for like fucking 12 hours, and I was just like, you know what? I don't fucking care anymore. Just like let me go back to Mexico. I'll go to a hotel. I want to go to bed. So it's probably like 12 o'clock by this time.
Mm.
And meanwhile, my mate, whose house I'd been at, like who was helping me like put all the tequila together, whose house I was staying at, was like, I had just left San Diego at like fucking 3 o'clock in the afternoon and just never come back. And I couldn't use my phone, so I was never sent anything.
He's gone to Tijuana and he's disappeared.
It just disappeared. So he's shitting himself. He's ringing everyone. I was like, what's fucking happened to this dude? So eventually it must have been like midnight. And I look in the rear view mirror because I'm just sitting there like in this part of second inspection, like under this shed away from everyone else, thinking that they're going to tear up my visa and send me back to Mexico. And I was so tired, whatever. I'll just fly back from Chile in the next couple of days. Fucking, I just want to get out of here now. And this dude I see he's like LA gangster dude in a customs uniform. He's like sauntering down towards the car through and I can see him coming in the rearview mirror. And I'm like, oh, fuck, here we go. Because I've just been yelled at for like 6 different dudes over the course of 5 hours. And I was like, oh, fuck, here we go. He goes again. And this dude, he saunters up and he goes, you do not fuck with the United States. And he starts this out of fucking speech about, you do not fuck with the United States. You do not fuck with Marco Sanchez. And I was like, Oh, it's like, and in the end, he just fucking throws my passport in the window and goes, "Get the fuck out of here!" And I was like, "Oh, sweet!" And I just drove into San Diego. So in the end, it was like, I don't know. It was like, I can't remember the exact number. We ended up losing just by sheer chance. When me and you split the tequila up, most of the expensive shit I had put into my car the first time, like for no reason, I just put it in there. So most of the really extra echoes and stuff made it through. And so, yeah, as I went back and then the next day changed my flight and fucking put it all together and flew out.
Did you get that tequila back, though? The stuff that was confiscated? Or was that
gone? I never got it back. I got like a letter like 12 months later saying that you can appeal the decision. And I tried to appeal it and just like literally no one ever responded to me. I think it was basically just a technicality. They're like, yeah, fucking come and get it.
Good God.
That was. I was on the blacklist. I was on the US Customs blacklist for years. Every time I flew into the US, I'd have to go to second inspection and get it grilling.
There's been a couple of those. I think there was another dodgy situation where I had to meet you at the Greyhound bus depot in downtown LA when you'd traveled up. I think you traveled up from San Diego again, right? But you got a bus and you had to give me like a couple of boxes of tequila that you were lugging with you. I can't remember what you're doing in that situation, but there's very, very sketchy situations you've put yourself and myself in to for the future benefit of Tequila Tromba.
For the greater good of the brand. Yeah, there's a lot of different stories over the years. Lots and lots. The story I tell, I think Jim talked about this on the on his session with you. His session of the Dish Pig was a story when we first started, where we had to, when I flew to LA, Rodrigo flew up from we saw on the airport and then flew back, and that was an intense thing. But yeah, it's good. Those are the sort of stories that could help define, the culture of the brand, the culture of the company. Like, just that we're willing to just get the job done attitude. So, they're a pain in the ass at the time, but they're good stories that help form the culture of the company over the course of the years.
Well, Nick Reid, co-founder of Tequila Tromba, thank you for joining us on the Dish Pig. It's been an absolute treat.
Thank you very much, Nick. It's been a pleasure.
G'day, guys. Thanks for listening. If you have an inspirational culinary story or know someone that does, and you'd like to hear it featured on the Dish Pig, then send us an email to ask@dishpigpodcast.com or send us a message on Instagram at @the_dish_pig. See you next time.